when you called up and talked about this, I might have gotten an invitation, but I had a thunder on it. Yeah. But you didn't get it?
Well,
She was one of the early ones.
You just walked around there Congratulations.
I wish you were Merrill.
Wow.
68.
In fact, he said,
I like these animal posters. I know. I was like, where do I get those? Oh, yeah. A lot of these.
You know,
sometimes my interns show up.
and maybe
We also attend the
trustee outside. I mean,
Wouldn't that be wonderful?
outside Union School District.
Oh, that would be fantastic.
In
No, I
elementary.
know it is.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, and just,
We have a new department,
And
called the
your
child
talk-
department in our district, the department in itself. And the whole point of that is try to.
yeah. So how,
So we look at it.
then I will be all ears. Thank you. That's great.
See what they need.
So there is a
You
big
know,
effort
this is
to.
one of the great thing about being provost over time is that if they come back, now I can say, welcome back. So yes.
David, he kept sending me, he texted me, when you break away, I'm going to dinner. No,
Tell me about.
I have stuff I have to do. So yes, I'm a great guy.
Let me give you a plate.
Thank you so much.
Oh, they were right down here.
Yes, that's right.
Yes, okay.
Yes, well, I
We have
presume there's
more.
more coming.
I'm sorry, I see that we're out of order, so we make sure.
we're going to sit here. We're all sitting here.
It's good to see you. Yeah.
David, sweet friend of Mike.
Okay.
And then he retired. And they had a celebration.
What this is such a funny, the plan I think is too big for the stand.
Okay. They do something.
No, it's not. But that's okay, just go ahead. That's why I'm going. I saw it as a earlier,
What I like about this gathering every year is that we have participants from our earliest years and participants who are not even yet alumni, and everyone in between. And for those of you who are annual or semi-annual returnees to this event, thank you very much for coming. And for those of you who are coming for the first time, thank you very much for coming. I really enjoy doing this. You're here in the Merrill Provost House, which is meant to be both a public and private space. It's the private space for the provost and family, and it's the public space for the entire community. How that latter is defined varies from year to year. Last year, the Crown Provost and I were running regular meetings at our houses. At Merrill, they were called Cookies and Conversation, and also Cat and Dog. It turns out that putting the cat and the dog on the poster meant that our attendance went way up. And at Crown, I forget what they were called, but the point was we would invite students into our homes in a regular way so as to make sure that we were less remote, more connected to the student population. I actually loved doing it last year, but I will note that for some reason or other, all I got were crownies at this. So that was fine because I like them too. We've taken a little time off this year because we're rethinking that event, but I really enjoy having students in the house. I occasionally hold a class in the house, and the house is also used for other course-related events as well. I wanted to tell this group, yesterday morning I gave an update about things that were happening at the university, things that were happening campus-wide, and things that were happening at Merrill College. And at the front of the house, you'll see all kinds of paper artifacts, including a densely printed double-sided sheet of paper that includes the Merrill curriculum for 2018-2019. And I encourage you to pick that up if you haven't. Every year there's some kind of change on that sheet, and it includes what's up. Yeah, Lisa, you have it. That's the undensely, colorfully printed one. And there's a version of it. Actually, there's a version of it that is very thickly printed. That one, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you need your reading glasses for that. But it does give a snapshot of our academic offerings here. Yesterday morning, I spent some time talking about the academic literacy curriculum, which is it's the two-part, more or less two-part series of courses. Hi, come on in.
Hi.
Thanks, way over. And there's a piano bench over there. And I should have said I'm Elizabeth Abrams, I'm the provost. So I spent some time yesterday morning talking about the academic literacy curriculum, which is the lower division, the big innovation in lower division instruction at UC Santa Cruz. And I'm thinking it may be a big innovation in lower division instruction nationally. We're in, as I said yesterday, we're in year 0 of the academic literacy curriculum, the ALC, and the big innovation, again, as I mentioned yesterday, was this is a course, whereas before we had put the core class together with writing instruction in the first quarter of core, so that students were satisfying several requirements all at once. Our discovery was that it turns out when you have multiple sets of expected course outcomes piled onto one course at the very beginning of students' college education, you don't actually achieve all those outcomes, and things don't work out so well. So the big change that we made was we moved into a two-part structure with the core classes campus-wide, becoming reading courses, followed by the writing courses offered by the writing curriculum. Now, if this sounds remedial, or if it sounds like, well, gee, don't our kids know how to read? Of course, everyone knows how to read when coming into the university. The point of the what are now called College 1 courses campus-wide, Merrill 1, Cowell 1, and so on, is we teach reading as it's done at the university level for a variety of different settings, in a variety of different genre. We're teaching kinds of reading, genre of reading. We're teaching ways of reading, strategies of reading, and we're teaching those things explicitly, so that if students can recognize the principles, they can apply them in other settings. So I see Teddy over here nodding. Nod really hard, Teddy, when I say metacognition. So one thing I have learned is that Merrill students know what metacognition means. I wanted to say, yesterday,
Willing to explain, she just said she didn't understand.
would anyone here care to explain metacognition?
I think metacognition is like the thinking about thinking, like thinking what you are thinking about.
Yes.
That's the key phrase I got the entire quarter.
Yes. Exactly right. Thinking about thinking, and if you can name the things that you're thinking about, then you can apply them in other settings. So the concept of metacognition, of being able to say what it is that we are thinking, what it is that we know, means that then we can carry it forward into other settings, and it makes the learning from one setting portable to another. And that's critical, because you don't want anyone to come into a class and say, well, that was okay, I learned about X, but I don't see how it's going to be useful to me in my sociology major, or I don't see how it's going to be useful to me in my biology major. We want these classes to be useful across the curriculum. So I wanted to say, and I'm happy to go more into detail for anyone who wasn't here yesterday morning, but I wanted to shift into the sequence of activities that we did in our core class this year, because I think it illuminates what this class is up to. So core classes are no longer writing classes, but of course the way that we understand what students have learned and what they're thinking about is through writing. So there's a little bit of a paradox there. We need to read students' writing in order to evaluate the thinking that they're doing, but we need to stop evaluating their writing in terms of writing, in terms of structure and really clearly focused thesis statements and so on. That's not what core is about anymore. It's about another set of another kind of knowledge that will go into their writing of much better structured, more focused writing in their subsequent writing courses. So one of the things that is, I'm a member of the writing program, and I have sort of seen my life's work, because most of the writing courses I teach are lower division first year writing courses. I have discovered that my life's work is undoing something that was invented a long time ago, and that's the 5-paragraph theme. I'm not actually entirely against the 5-paragraph theme. It has its uses in the world. It's excellent for reporting back information that you already know. But it is not a structure for discovery. And as a writing teacher, what I'm always engaged in is having students discover what it is they're interested in and follow a train of thought, learn new things, teach themselves something in the act of writing about it. And the very first assignment of the core class is something that we called a difficulty paper. We gave students something very hard to read. And in the Merrill core class, this is an essay actually those of you who took core a few years ago may have been assigned this essay. It's an essay by sociologist Stuart Hall, cultural studies icon, and it's called Ethnicity, Identity, and Difference. And every word in it is understandable, but conceptually it's difficult because it's a new kind of writing, a new genre for most of the students, actually probably 100% of the students. And it's very challenging conceptually. And the assignment for this class is called a difficulty paper, and it's simply find something that you found difficult, that is not just lexical, not just understanding a word, but conceptual, and engage with the difficulty. Unpack the difficulty of this paper, this concept. It's a short paper, a couple pages long, and it is an anti-5 paragraph essay. You can write it in 5 paragraphs, but it is meant not to report what everybody would agree upon, but to reflect one's own process of thinking about this difficulty and coming to some level of understanding about it. So that was the very first paper of the quarter. It's not the first writing that students did in the quarter, but it was meant to set up a new paradigm for university level writing, which is that this is a place where we discover, where we engage with difficulty, and where difficulty does not mean that you are a failure because you don't get it. It means that you are part of a community that is interested in figuring stuff out. So that was the point, one of the many points of the difficulty paper, and it's what the first formal assignment that students turned in. I stress that it was the first formal assignment, and that's because actually, well before that, students had started writing in what we called a commonplace book. And we have students writing all kinds of things. Teddy, you'll probably laugh because I kept on inventing new sections for the commonplace book, and my poor students were like, well, how many pages do I need for each section? These are regular composition books that essentially had sections or chapters in them for different aspects of engaging with the class. Teddy, can you remember some of our sections?
We did like reading sections where we did a lot of reflection on like the text that we were reading and going to talk about. We had one on metacognition, and I think those are the main ones.
Inventory.
Oh right, yeah, where we would find different aspects of like what we thought worked for us, and saying like, oh, like definition wise, or like annotating or something like that.
Yeah. We had sections on the news because one of our readings for the class is the New York Times. Students were reading the Times pretty regularly. We had sections on terminology, and this is really important to have a glossary where students were picking up the glossary, the vocabulary of the class itself, because again, that terminology would be portable to other courses as well. So there were, and then, I don't know, we had another half dozen. I kept on creating new sections. There's a thing about a year zero of a class, it's all invention, and guinea pigs, so thank you, guinea pigs. The next assignment for the quarter was what do we call it? A collage. Okay, so if any of you are writing pedagogues and are familiar with Peter Elbow, you will know the term collage as a writing genre. But a collage is, in Elbow's concept, is, well, you take little bits and pieces of your writing from different places, and you put them together. And you don't have to bother with transitions at all. You can just put 3 dots in between, and that's your. Then you polish it up a little bit, and you edit stuff out, and you arrange it in an order that seems appropriate to you, and then you turn it in. Well, we thought that it would be a good idea to do a collage in the Merrill core class too. But, and I should say that while Peter Elbow calls this a collage, there's also a technical term for this kind of production. It's called paratactical writing. It means that everything is happening without transitions. And the point is if you are dispensing with transitions, what you are doing instead is creating transitions by juxtaposition, which means that you really have to think hard about the relationship amongst the parts. I wanted to do a collage in the Merrill core class that would reflect group thinking and not just the work of individuals. And so our students put together collaborative collages about which each student wrote an individual reflection, but the collages were productions of a group. Now, the collage groups, they were actually entirely marvelous. The readings that students had been doing in order to write these collages, first of all, they had been writing about these readings in their composition books, their commonplace books. And so students had produced quite a lot of writing based on quite a number of different prompts in their personal writing. And that was going to be the source of the writing for the collage. The readings that they did, for a number of years in the Merrill Core course, we've been reading quite an interesting book by Anne Fadiman called The Spirit Catches You and You Fall Down, which is really about a clash in worldviews that came down to a clash in medical versus spiritual treatment of epilepsy in Merced. It came down to the story of a specific family and a specific young girl, a Hmong family. The parents and family and children had emigrated as part of a forced emigration in the wake of the Vietnam War. And the struggles in their engagement with the medical community in Merced. So for many years we've been reading this book, and we've been reading it, the way you read a book from beginning to end. This year we selected only certain chapters from that book, and then we read a series of different sources about yellow rain. And those of you who are a certain age will recognize the term yellow rain as entirely fraught. So this is it was an incident, a series of incidents in the 70s that reported chemical warfare in Laos that was received something that looked like yellow rain, that then seriously damaged the health and in some cases killed the villagers in the Laotian highlands. The accusation was that this was a chemical warfare produced by the Soviets, and the concern about it was credible enough that the United States nearly got our own chemical warfare machine rolling again. Then there was a great deal of reinvestigation of what yellow rain was, and a new explanation came out that it was not chemical warfare, but in fact mass bee defecation, which actually is a phenomenon. It happens in the world. And in the course of all of this, voices and experiences got overwritten, and lost. So part of what happened in the aftermath was the angst, the expression of misuse of their stories among people who had suffered from yellow rain and suffered from the aftermath of the war, the loss of Hmong voices, and the protest against that. Okay, so I've given you a capsule story about what happened here, but what the point is, our students had read, had background on one Hmong community in California, and they read a series of competing narratives about yellow rain that stretched across about 20 or 25 years. Some science and different genres, science genre, political science, newspaper reports, chemical engineering reports. What else did we read? We read the transcript, and we listened to a TED talk that was very shocking for a lot of our listeners. And students wrote about each of those pieces, and then as groups they decided which parts of their writing they would include in their collage and how they would arrange the collage so that it made sense, and also what kinds of expressions about that collage would make sense. And they had to negotiate what would be included, what would be left out, what they would say about it, and also what additional kinds of things they would include. So how would they mark or code the different subjects and the different voices. Mm-hmm. And the collages were arranged from something that looked like a paper with big spaces between the chunks to pieces that had bright colors, different illustrations, arrows, connections, and so on. So that they were a marvelous range, sort of demonstrating what could be possible from this. I think this might have been the most powerful project of the course, in part also because we were actively having students read about techniques of collaboration. This is critical because we also know that one of the big things that students, one of the big skills that jobs want when students come to them as graduates is they want workers who can work together. Ian, I don't know if you have worked in group projects in your place of work. I'm kind of imagining you have, but yes, he says. Okay. But we're actively trying to teach collaborative techniques in this course. Our last project of the quarter is, once again, we had students work in groups. This time, instead of my putting them together in groups, they created collectives of their own based on themes in the class that they were attracted to. And these collectives then produced a series of different artifacts for our end of the quarter presentation core night. And each of these artifacts that the students produced, students also wrote an artist statement about, and they were expressing in these artist statements what idea the artifact that they had produced expressed and how it connected to the collective idea. So the idea was an artist collective where individual projects demonstrated some aspect of the theme that the students were engaged in. So this too was a collaborative project, involved a great deal of thinking together, and also enabled students to produce something in a medium other than writing over the course of the quarter. Now, around the edges here, you'll see some projects. These are actually not projects from, one or two of them may be projects from this past year, but they are the kinds of projects that students who are engaged in projecting ideas in another medium can produce. I think this is just a small selection. We have videos, we have, you'll see over here, there's a quilt, there's a shrine, there's a Tower of Babel that was actually really interestingly created by a group of international students. The figure wearing the mask, it doesn't take a lot of imagination to imagine what was on that student's mind. You know, the earth-colored body and the mask over the face. But we have many wonderful projects, performances, and so on that students produced for our core night. We are already rethinking what we want to do with our core class this coming year, but the basic movement, I think, is going to be pretty close to the same. And our focus on collaborative work, on metacognition, on a range of different kinds of genre that students read and produce, is all, those things are all going to stay the same. If you don't mind, those students who took core this year, Teddy, you did that, and okay, so we've got a few students here who experienced this year's core, and a few students here who experienced earlier versions of core classes, and then many former students who experienced the core or taught it. Share with you a little bit. I am inordinately proud of our campus for being willing to invest in an experiment like this. There's a range of different ways that the different core classes are approaching the shared outcomes of core classes campus-wide. I may have immodestly suggested that the Merrill core class does it best yesterday, and I may be saying that again right now. But we're in year 0, and we are looking forward to many years in the future. So I wanted to share that with you, and I did not prepare our students to say anything in public, but I just want to point out that we've got a group of students here who have experienced various versions of core, and if you are willing to open your mouths and say anything, I think our other guests would be thrilled to hear what you have to say. And if you had a terrible experience in core, say nothing.
It's very direct.
I'm the provost.
You are.
You can say whatever you want, or nothing, actually. So, you know, you have conversations going. I'm happy to take questions, or...
I have a question. I wondered this yesterday when you talked, because I taught in the core class for years at Merrill. It was very different, but who are the instructors? Are they graduate students?
We have, for the past several years, we've had one graduate student who has been an instructor. So if anyone had her, this is Heather Schleiman. Heather is an advanced graduate student in the education department and actually has many years behind her as a high school teacher. There are usually 1 or 2 graduate students teaching at most of the colleges at any given time. Most of the other people who are teaching the core class are lecturers. Some of them have joint appointments in the writing program. Others teach in other parts of the campus. Others teach at other colleges and universities around. So for the most part, it's lecturers. I like to teach a class. I taught the core class this past year because I figured I had to teach the course that I helped invent so I could see if it worked or not. And then there are, Kresge College has been very enterprising, and I believe they're going to bring on 1 or 2 ladder faculty to teach. Maybe not the core class, maybe courses that follow on core, but it's mostly lectures, and they're mostly long-term faculty.
The encore classes.
Beg pardon?
The encore classes.
Well, so
What they get?
I get it, but actually they are essentially that. No, I'm laughing partly because Porter College, their version of Core Night is called Encore.
Oh.
Yeah. So,
Not original.
well, no, but it's, great minds think alike.
I, I just forgot what I was gonna ask, but, I was looking at Noel King's, and there were two quotes, totally separate. Are these the kind of things that you're talking about, like transition out of context, but his writing?
I haven't looked at this for a little while.
But the other.
Yes,
stuff
yes,
that I
that would
just
be
remembered-
paratactical.
Paratactical. I was trying to think of a paradigm for that, but the question, I just lost it again. Oh, shoot, it's right there. It feels like it's critical thinking.
It is.
Oh, well, good. That was another word that came to mind, and when you were talking about all this, and it was like, new words. What does it mean? It's critical thinking, basically. So you're looking at.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, so
We have,
exciting.
we have an acronym, ACMES, analysis, critical thinking, metacognition, engagement with others across difference, and self-efficacy. Remember that? Coming back, yeah, all right. We gotta get it, we have to put it on a poster in every classroom. All right, Lisa, I saw your hand and then,
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about the collaborative techniques, and if you
Yes.
could tell me a few of them.
yeah, so actually I think this would be a good moment to turn to students if you remember what you learned, but I will say that there's a wonderful book. It's essentially a primer on collaboration. It's by Joanna Wolf, and it's called, is it called Group Writing? It actually is a writing book, but it's about it. The chapters in it are extremely useful and portable to other settings, and they cover things like surfacing differences of opinion, and surfacing differences in working style and stakes, so that a group communicates with each other, with itself, about who's willing to do what are people's different strengths, what are their communication styles, and so on, so that instead of festering, or instead of, as often happens with group projects, one person does all the work and everybody else gets the credit for it. The point is, if you begin to understand how you all work together, then you can plan for it. I know those groups were not easy to make work, but I also think I know from the reports that students wrote that actually a lot of stuff got worked out by the process of thinking about how are we working together. So, there's always going to be a difficult student in one of the groups. There's always going to be someone who doesn't do the work. There's somebody who, whose point of view might be overwhelming everybody else's point of view. That happens, but recognizing that sort of thing happens and having a set of tools that you can begin working on with is useful. It doesn't mean that everything is going to be rosy at the end of a first project. It just means that, this happened, like you begin to recognize it and you begin to have an arsenal of techniques. Arsenal is maybe not the friendliest word to use. You had a question.
Yes, I'd like to make a comment if I might. So I'm a transfer student to UC Santa Cruz, and I took classes here in the early 2000s, and I didn't have the opportunity to take core classes. But I did have core class-like experience at a community college before I transferred over. I feel like I'm missing out. I feel like I missed out on that opportunity. Although the core class-like that I took as an undergraduate was akin to what you were saying, the literary mechanistic structures of how to present and how to explain. But so my wife, who wasn't able to join us as well today, she is a former UCSC student as well. And she was also at Merrill College. And she took the core classes from beginning to end. And the way she explained the core classes, I became even more envious. So it just sounds like, as a transfer student, I did feel like I missed out, but at the same time, I'm glad that it's progressing and evolving to where it is right now.
Well, thank you for saying that. you mentioned that you're a transfer student. I think one of the things that we really need to work on much harder on this campus is creating a curriculum that allows transfer students to have an effective transition to the university. Most of our transfer students are transferring in from community colleges, which have a really wonderful support system, but they're a college system and not a university system. And the shift from college to university can be jarring. So we do have services for transfer and reentry students that's called STARS, but we also have a massively increasing transfer student population with that has come with a statewide mandate to have at every campus a minimum of 2-to-1 enrollment of FROSH to transfer students. UC Santa Cruz, once that mandate came down, UC Santa Cruz achieved that 2-to-1 ratio within 1 year. But I'm just going to say what that also meant was that we did not have a matching infrastructure that developed at the same time. We always lag. We do something like, great idea, we're going to bring in, we're going to triple or quadruple or quintuple our population of international students. And then a year later, somebody says, oh, shouldn't we be offering some services for our new students who are like completely...
What was the previous ratio?
Well, for transfer students, there was a system-wide requirement of 2-to-1, but it was always understood to be a ratio that was averaged across the entire system. And then this, 2 years ago, the legislature said, no, actually, it's every college, every campus. And so we had one of the smallest populations of transfer students, and we just went right up. It's great because there's a level of experience and eagerness amongst transfer students that really adds to the campus, but it's a stressor for transfer students. Yeah, Lisa.
Yeah, I was just reflecting on what you were talking, your description of core, and really appreciating the depth of the way it was thought out. And I'm not saying it to say, you did a great job, but you did do a great job. I just, what I was reflecting on was, wow, what would happen to this country if every person had to take this kind of course? And in terms of, finding maybe commonality between different views, but also the process of looking at group dynamic. And I find myself struggling in several groups I'm in with how to have my voice heard. I tend to not always speak if people are whatever, more domineering. In some cases, I'm not aware of other people who need to speak, and that I just think like group dynamic issues is such an important piece of all of our lives, and not just in our work, but in our life. And I really commend you for looking at that or having that be a part. And I'd love to hear, if students want to talk about what that was like for them. But also just the difficulty paper and sort of unpacking what it was that people had difficulty with and why, and it's just critical thinking, which, I just thought, wow. I mean, I realized that that's something I really appreciate about this university, and,
Yeah, I will say, I think a key thing about core classes always has been that whether we say it directly or not, we consider core classes to be democracy school. But the more that we can articulate it, the more that we can say these are the tools that you need in order to participate effectively in a democracy and to maintain an effective democracy, the better off we are.
I think it's probably also the case that since we were all scrambling to teach a new course for the first time, that we probably did not articulate as clearly as we should have what, what the stages were, what the steps were, why we were doing what we were doing, and so on. So there's always, when I observe classes, one of the things that I often wind up telling the teachers I'm observing is signpost more, explain more, have the banner that says, today's purpose is, and what we're doing now is for this purpose. And I'm sure that's true of the way I taught the course and the way my colleagues taught the course. And yet, at the same time, I'm pretty confident of what the steps were. So, thanks. David?
I think the answer to the question of what would happen if everybody had an education like this is that we would soon have a foreign policy that Americans can be proud of. I wanted to say just really along the same line, when you were describing the entry experiences of Merrill students today, I was thinking two things. One, that I'd have had a hard time surviving that process myself with the mental formation that I had in the 1950s and 60s. And I was thinking that as a teacher, I would have given my eye teeth to have a classroom full of people with that kind of experience if they were the products of public education. I did have privileged students from time to time who thought in ways that nobody else in the class could even begin to imagine. And I was not very skillful at dealing with both at the same time. So it seems like a mighty enterprise. And the last thing I want to say is that I was also sitting here wondering if it would be useful to the organizers of the Merrill Core course today to have an old white guy as a student and participate in the process. I was wanting to do the exercise with the Stuart Hall essay, which I'm sure I would have a lot of trouble understanding myself as a veteran of many years here.
So, yeah, I think the answer is tentatively yes. Several of my colleagues in other core classes actually opened their core classes to alumni this past year. I think Cowell and Crown both did that. I have no idea how they did it. It wasn't necessarily that the alumni were local and actually attending class, but there was some methodology to it, and it was enriching all around. And so, David Sweet, I would love to have you as a student in the Merrill Provost.
You might have 3 or 4 other people trying that too.
I'll throw my hat in that ring.
Paper, I'm so glad that you said what you said about the difficulty paper, because really what the difficulty paper is not, it's not an unusually punitive assignment that we're giving to students. We're giving to students what we do ourselves. In assigning a difficulty paper, we're simply saying this is the experience that academics go through when they encounter new and challenging material. Is we recognize what we're having difficulty with, and we try not to skate over it, rather than, because that's, the impulse, and I don't mean just for students, I mean for everyone. The impulse is to say, I get it, but actually, it's how much more valuable to say, this is the part I don't get, and let me see how I can make my way through it. You wrote difficulty papers all the time because you.
Analyze.
Or failed to, right?
Okay. Jill.
I keep on thinking of Paulo Freire, I don't
Yeah.
know, because in my time at Merrill, that was the one course that altered my world, because I had to take photographs of things that I thought were relevant in the community, and everybody did the same, and how we juxtapose those together. It's almost like what you're doing, and I felt like, wow, this is connected in
Yeah.
some way,
Yeah.
because that was my eye-opening.
Well, unsurprisingly, Paulo Freire is on our reading list for the core class.
Oh, wonderful.
I will say, my apologies, Teddy. In my class, I just ran out of time. But a number of the other sections did teach Freire. Did you read Freire in your section? Did you read Freire in your section? Yeah, okay, good, because, so we're still adhering to Freire.
It's the
yeah.
consciousness of doing that typical paper and
Yeah.
the layers of it. I love it. Yeah, okay.
Good. Well, that's kind of what I have to say about core. Core is, core remains strong. So we spent about 3 years going through the process of, oh my God, studying core as it existed, detailing what was working and what were the many things that were not working, producing a proposal, working with the writing program, having our proposal shot down, writing another proposal, working with the writing program, having that one shot down and laughed at, and then coming to a great impasse, and then finally having a summit meeting, and actually it's sort of like, I want to say it was like Yalta, having a conversation at the railing of the deck out there. Having a conversation that says, well, what can we agree upon? And that led to the proposal that was actually accepted, and to some degree, I think, embraced by the university. So we'll see. I mean, we are in year 0, but the university has made a significant investment in this course campus-wide. I am really looking forward to seeing the next stages of it. And this is critical, in what way do the stages of, in what way does this Merrill-specific core class help strengthen the other parts of the Merrill curriculum that we are offering? So those courses, the field study, the careers in public service, the classroom connection course, which sends students out to public education institutions locally and regionally, our Merrill undergraduate research scholarships, and so on. So these are all things that I'm hoping the new Merrill core class will strengthen as well. So again, I want to thank you for coming for brunch. I hope you will eat more fruit, more frittata, converse more, find out what you can find out from our wonderful current students. Wonderful current students, find out what you can find out from wonderful former students in Emeriti, and enjoy what is beginning to be a lovely day at the Merrill Provost.